Welcome to Think Like a Dog podcast, where we explore dog behavior and psychology-based training to help your dog achieve their full potential. Welcome back to Think Like a Dog podcast. And today we have Jill here with us, and she's been on previous episodes. Jill is a trainer at Mirror Image Canine. And today we're going to talk about recall. Recall has been a big topic for us. I even have been texting Millie the last few days with questions about recall on my end, because recall is such an important, thing that you have to teach your dog that really can save their life in a lot of different situations.
Yeah, it's a life or death command. Recall is the thing that if your dog runs out in the middle of the road, you say their name and they come back when you call them. That could save their lives. It's also your command that you can grow your relationship through. So in a way of, it can basically become your off-leash leash. So if your recall is good enough, you can put your dog in different situations and then be able to control where they are and how they cope with those situations and get them out of a potentially dangerous situation. So like with socialization, if they are off leash hiking and there's another animal there, their recall is your life or death. I mean, that's everything. If you're practicing any sort of command, because we talk all the time about how we're not like obedience focused, but if there's one thing that we teach, it is recall. From the time that they're puppies, you have a whole, in your puppy class, you have a whole like
commands class. Yeah.
And the main thing is recall, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously I think there's a difference between like how we would teach it as a puppy and then how I would teach it to an adult dog, and then sort of the progression of that. How would you teach it to like a baby little puppy?
I start with making sure that the puppy understands basic leash pressure. And this isn't like 8-week-old puppy. It's puppies that attend my puppy class.
Like 4 months, probably. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So I make sure that they have a solid understanding of the leash pressure, and I use probably like starting with a 6-foot leash. And I just practice, say puppy come. Use the leash pressure to enforce what I say. And then once they come to me, sometimes based on the dog, depending on the dog, I'll use treats, sometimes maybe just affection. And sometimes either one of those things is a little too much and kind of create some excitement with the dog. But most of the time I'll use like affection, maybe treats.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of how I guess we teach it to adult dogs. Mm-hmm. I feel like I teach with puppies, I use more treats than I would have with adult dogs. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the process of teaching it is always ensuring that there is never a time where your dog or puppy can blow you off, right? So we say that in everything that we ask our dogs. So if you tell your dog to go to place, you make sure that you are set up to enforce that thing that you just asked. So it's important in every aspect, but it is so important when it comes to recall. There are times where, for example, my puppy Brick is in the backyard, and if he is playing or doing something or whatever, if I can kind of predict that he's not going to come back if I call him, I'm not saying it. Or if I say it one time and he doesn't come back, I don't say it a second time. I just go out there and get him. I want to make sure that there are as minimal possible times that I'm saying Brick come or puppy come, whatever, and they are not immediately coming back. So that leash is the key for recall. You always start out with a leash. And if your dog is not reliable, if your puppy's not every puppy, it's very rare for a puppy to be reliable with recall. But if you don't have a pretty good, solid recall command, you don't take your leash off. That's just, you always ask with the leash.
And kind of piggybacking off of what Millie said, with, she's only going to say it one time and then she's going to enforce it by using the leash or going out to go get him. What I'm saying to people all the time, if you're constantly just repeating any command, honestly, but especially recall, if you're just always saying like Brick come, then eventually that command becomes kind of background noise to them, and they're no longer going to feel any sort of way about that command.
Yeah, I mean, I say you're Charlie Brown's teacher in that moment if you're just nonstop talking. So, I mean, whenever we're doing recall drills, and we can kind of go over some ways of just a bunch of different exercises that you can add in and sprinkle in your day-to-day routines with your dogs of teaching recall and at different levels. But if you're having a whole conversation with your dog and then all of a sudden you go Brick come, then that brick come isn't going to mean as much. So make sure that the talking that you're doing around the command is also pretty minimal. So you want to make sure that when you say what that is, that it means something to the dog. And yes, we can use a motivator like food or affection when they're younger, when we first start out. But I think a really big point that we like to talk about when it comes to recall is we don't really treat it like an obedience command. We firmly believe that recall is a relationship-based characteristic. So my dog's ability or motivation, let's say, drive to turn around and come back to me when there is something potentially more exciting on, further away from me, that's something I earn. That's something I earn not through practicing recall drills, although that absolutely helps, but that's something I earn through how I live with my dog every single day. A lot of people come to me and they go, okay, well, I want my dog to come back when I call them. And I go, but they are allowed on furniture. They kind of make their own decisions, and every single day they do whatever they want, whenever they want. And my response is, well, why would they come back to you? Because they are doing whatever they want all the time. But then now you expect when you say these words and there is something crazy exciting for them to just come back. Then, because you have a treat, you can't guarantee that the treat is always going to be more exciting than the other option.
I think it's kind of like how it works with even kids or teenagers too. If you have no rules in the house, they do whatever they want. The one day you try to set a rule down, they're not necessarily just going to say, okay, right, I'll follow that through, because they weren't taught that.
Right.
So with our dogs too, I haven't been reinforcing that recall at home. And that's my issue now, is that they kind of go out in the yard, they do what they want. We're fenced in, so they're pretty safe when they're here in our yard. But I think for them, it did become background noise when it comes from me, or it comes from Ozzy, because I feel like we repeat it so many times, and that's where we're not reinforcing that. So I'm trying to take a step back now and really work on that with them, because they're not always going to be in our house, in our yard, where everything's fenced and they're safe. It could be where we can let them off leash, maybe at the dog beach or whatever it is. I don't know the situations that we're going to be in the future, but I'm really trying to get a step back, because our dogs, they do great when they go to day camp. So they have learned that, that mentality of listening and following through, and following through with rules and staying calm and staying neutral. So they all made amazing progress, but they know with us, things are a little bit easier. Dogs are really smart, they kind of know who to listen to sometimes. I can get away with a little bit more with you than with you.
It's the same thing that we talked about it's because there are times where you are saying it and it's not happening. So they're learning it doesn't have to, right? So if I tell you, if I tell Jillian, clean the training room every single day, but she only does it, maybe 2 of those days that I tell her, she's slowly going to start doing it less and less, because I'm not enforcing it, right? So she's learning, okay, nothing happens when I don't do it, so why do it, right? On top of the fact that, maybe my relationship with Jillian in this example, I know it's not truly how it is. Maybe I am not earning that, right? Maybe I'm not earning that leadership role in your life, and I am letting you do whatever you want, whenever you want. You can come in to work whenever you want. You can, leave the training room, the day camp room, however you want, take super long lunch breaks. And then I tell you at the end of the day, can you clean the training room? And then you don't. And then I just keep asking you over and over and over again. You're going to look at me like, well, I'm not doing this, right? Like, why would I? That's not who you are to me, right? That's not what we practice day in and day out. But given your example of, your dogs are safe in your yard, and, they know they don't necessarily have to come, but you don't know what situations you're going to put them in the future. Absolutely. But you also don't know what situations are going to happen here. What if somebody leaves the gate open? Yeah. What if, that's my big thing of when somebody comes to spray my backyard for mosquitoes, what if the gate gets left open, which happened one time, and a couple of my boarding dogs and my dogs, I saw them in the front yard and I'm like, wait a second. But I was able to open my front door and I was able to say, Rio, come, Kemper, come, Millie, come. And they were like, okay, cool. Yeah,
Millie.
let's go. Right. Yeah, I know. There's a lot. I had a whole Millie army. But they all immediately came right to me. Or what if there's a snake in the yard and you see it and you're calling your dog away from this poisonous snake? There's so many reasons that recall is the most important command that you can ask 100%. Your dog to turn on a dime. Like you want precision with recall. You don't want like a lazy, I'll come whenever I feel like it. It's, I want my dog to turn on a dime. I literally just posted a reel last night of one of our day camp dogs, Gunner, got the zoomies and Kemper turned around to go and chase him. And I said, Kemper, come. And he turned on a dime to come back to me. But that's because that's 2.5 years of practicing. It's not something that happens overnight.
Yeah, you really have to know that you have to put in work and practice. And no matter what, you can send your dogs off to boarding. You can send them to camps every day. If you don't do it at home, they're not going to have that mentality where you call and they come and it turns, that switch turns right away. I'm trying to tell my mom, Ozzy, everybody that interacts with our dogs, please do not call them to come if you can't reinforce it.
Yeah.
And my mom was having trouble with Bubbles calling him. He's not coming. I said, stop calling him. Just walk up to him with a leash, grab him and make him come back. That's better than calling him and then he keeps blowing you off.
Absolutely.
So we're going to start working on that every single day. Because like you said, there's so many different situations that your dog can be in. And that recall is the one thing that's going to save their life. So if your dog doesn't know anything at all, that's the one obedience command that you are really big on is recall.
Oh yeah.
You and Jill, you guys really talk about that
recall,
a lot.
I mean, Jill's like my recall person. She loves working on recall, but she uses it in a very cool way too of she'll put a reactive dog in a situation where maybe they're, closer to a potential trigger and then use recall as a way for them to get out of that. So basically she's also reinforcing the relationship of, hey, look, I can offer you safety. You can move away from the thing that scares you, on top of reinforcing recall as something that makes them feel better when they do it. So the reward to them, it has to be specific to the dog. We can talk about rewards a little bit. So for some dogs, the reward that I offer is just simply safety by my side. So for a dog that Jillian was working with yesterday, one of our reactive dogs, I would see her put her kind of like almost fish her out or reel her out kind of towards other dogs. And she'd get a little bit tense. And then Jill would go, Piper, come. She would call her and enforce it and bring her back in because she wasn't coming on her own, I don't think at first.
Not at first.
Yeah.
No.
And then she would have her sit by her side because by my side means safety. So that is a reward. I mean, we can treat that, but that's just going to excite the dog. You can give affection, but for a dog who is more tense, that's not going to mean as much. What matters is that you're offering them a place where they can go, okay, whew, I can process here. I can I've created distance. I've created kind of a way to opt out on top of it feels good to listen to this lady. Does that make sense? Like that's a huge reward. Obviously food is one, and that's something that you can sprinkle in.
Right.
Affection is another. I like to use movement as a reward. I went over that in a session. So like I'll turn it into a let's go. Do you do that?
Yeah, I do. I was doing that a little bit with the dog we're talking about. I was doing that a bit yesterday because to her that movement did feel good instead of just kind of sitting there and amping herself up about the other dogs. So yeah.
Yeah, it helps to like go, I'll use Kemper as an example. It helps for dogs who are they're not in a place where they can process. And I think that might have been where she was of, I'll go Kemper, come. And then as they're coming to me, I'll turn into a let's go of like, let's move now. So it almost gives the dog something else to do of like, move with me. It's not just be bored by my side or get more tense by my side, but it's a matter of looking at the situation, reading the dog's response even. That's important too, because I could go into a situation with a dog and be like, okay, this dog is going to want some processing time by my side, or this dog is going to want to move with me. But I have to look at and see what is the response? Is this working? Am I getting a good response? Does the dog, do I feel more synced up with this dog or less? And you just kind of trial and error that.
So when you're working on recall, you put them on a long leash, and you use the lead as a way to reinforce the recall. How often would you say, like, let's say in my case, I'm working on the recall. You're telling someone, you know, like me, how many minutes a day would you put aside for that specifically? When do you stop using the lead as your reinforcement to like kind of work on your dog on just off leash? Like what point would you say, okay, now it's time to work on that? And how would you reinforce it when they are off leash and you call?
That's a lot of questions in a row.
I know. That's just, I'm just knocking it all out because those are.
Do you want to do the how often?
Yeah. As far as like how long, right? How long
would you practice that, like every day, to really start,
gotcha.
you know, like kind of like you put it on your schedule. That's my thing now. I need to know how long I need to,
So
how long I need to dedicate for this.
Before we started before you hit record, you literally just said you were not a planner. So I don't know that is what you need.
I need to do better for my dogs. Those guys, they are just living the life at home, and then they go to camp and they do great there. They're great dogs at camp, but when they get home, they're like, you know, kicking their feet up,
Mom, bring me
getting
a
margarita by the pool, just chilling, you know. Everybody's serving to them their dinners on time, their breakfast is on time.
You're
Those
very
dogs
well
are
trained.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm the best trained of the house.
Yeah, you really are.
So how long would you say, Jill? Like what?
yeah. So I probably wouldn't be spending like 20 minutes at a time working on recall in my backyard because the dog's probably going to get kind of bored.
Yeah.
And also it's predictable at that point. Your dog already kind of knows what you're doing back there. And yes, that is good practice, you know, to have them practice listening to that command and turning around and coming back to you. But at a certain point, it gets kind of boring for them. So I would say maybe work on it like 5 minutes multiple times a day, random points of the day. Like you can even do it on your walk. Bring along.
It's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, bring a long line with you, or even like walk them on a long line, but shorten it up as you're walking. And then every so often give them more of the leash and practice calling them back to you, and then continue with your walk and kind of just sprinkle that in there.
When you're calling them back, like in our case, let's say, I think Kane is a good example. Like Kane,
I want to go ahead and let you know, Bubbles, you don't want to do more than 5 minutes. Like Bubbles is going to be maybe 3 minutes and then he's going to need a break.
Bubbles is our pity, and he just flops over it and drops on the ground, and it's like, I'm done. I'm done.
I mean, every dog has different amount of threshold, right?
Yeah.
So like there are dogs with a lot of drive. Like Max could probably do, 20, 30 minutes
An
of
hour.
recall. Yeah.
I could just be there the whole day, and he's just gonna.
But it would still be productive at that point.
Right.
But
Sure.
for Bubbles, it would be 3 minutes. And then you're like, okay, now we're at a point where you're going to start rolling over and not listening to me. And I don't want to fight through this. So we'll do 3 minutes, make sure it's productive, and then put you up. But sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to make sure you weren't going to work Bubbles for a whole 5 minutes.
And so when you're calling them back, are you giving them affection, or should you add in, like for a dog that you're really trying to work on it? Let's say listeners, they're just starting to do this with their dog. Are you adding in treats in the beginning? Then what is the reward at that moment for a dog that's not necessarily reactive, or, you're kind of in a quiet place with them and working on recall?
You can try the treats at first. I think if you start with them and it like way overly excites your dog, then maybe not. Maybe try just using affection. But even affection can overly excite your dog. So it's just kind of finding what works for you. And honestly, you don't always even need that reward, because I like to say that command is kind of like expected, especially once your relationship is at that point. If you call your dog, they should just come to you, and your leash kind of reinforces that.
Yeah, it would be like if you said Ozzy's name and he just blew you off a bunch, right? Like it's expected for him to respond because you're in a relationship with him. It's the same thing with your dogs. So you don't need to like, every time you say Ozzy, your husband's name, you don't need to be like, and he responds, here's a reward. It's a conversation that you're having. True. So it's not something, and it's also not realistic to always have treats. So right. I do like with Brick, I think the first way actually with the puppy that I taught recall was I taught him his name. So when I said Brick, gave him not even a treat, part of like a kibble of his, but I did that one time for one meal. And then now I say, Brick, come when he comes back in from inside. Sometimes I'll give him a treat. Sometimes I won't. But the majority of the time I'm not treating him for that because I I'm not always going to have food on me. It's just not realistic for me to. But I think it's a matter of when it comes to like frequency or how long you do it. One of my favorite exercises, and Jill said it, you can do it a little longer than, 5 or 10 minutes, is take them on a walk, but it's a different kind of walk. It's not like your structured leash walk. It's, putting them on a long lead. And I used to when Kemp was a puppy, let him get into different scents, call him back. And then either move him into a let's go or put him by my side. So it would be practicing recall on the walk, or, bring him to a new park and put him on a long line and just kind of follow him for a little bit, let him get into some sort of scent and then call him back. Cause I knew if Kemper's a pit hound mix, and I knew that if there was one thing I was going to be fighting, it was going to be his nose all the time. Right. For Bubbles, it's going to be probably more what he sees.
Yeah.
So it would be like, you could have other dogs playing, or, and then call him off of them. So it would be something, it's what do you think is the trigger area going to be, and then working off of that. But I used to take hour-long walks with Kemper. First 15 minutes of it was structure. Middle of it was like he could, roam, and then I would call him back in. And then the last 15 minutes of it was structure. So I would start and end with, I would start with structure to set the tone, and end with structure to create the association for the next time that we do this, that I need to still be relevant. But I think it's a matter of how you do this in your everyday life. So you can take walks and practice it at night. I've been practicing it because Kemper doesn't like to go out for his last potty break. So instead of calling him at the door, I now call him 2 feet away from him. And then he looks at me like, okay, I guess you're going to make me get off of place. And then he comes with me. But that's still practicing recall.
Okay.
It's just when are you saying it, and when is it getting enforced?
Even in the house. Yeah. That's a big one. I feel like today I caught myself like calling my dog's names, because Dennis, our new foster, was here with me. And so Dennis, just to touch bases, because we haven't talked about Dennis.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Before I start throwing in names to you guys and you don't even know what I'm talking about. Dennis is our new best chance dog. He is a 1.5-year-old doodle. Came to us since his previous family was saying they were allergic and they had to rehome him. They didn't really have a vetting process in place. They were just kind of trying to give him to whoever wanted him. And he was not neutered, not up to date on any shots. Usually dogs like that, they're a big target. So thankfully they were open to rescue, and we took him in. And right now he's healing through after neuter. And then he's going to start the Best Chance program, attending some of the day camps, working with one of our dedicated fosters as well. So today he was with me, and he was just kind of roaming in the house, and I kept a lead on him because he needs that direction, and he loves that direction. Like when I don't give him direction, he stops in the middle of the house. Like, what am I supposed to do? So he doesn't even know what to do at this point. So he was kind of all over the place this morning, and I was just calling his name, Dennis, come, Dennis, come. And obviously he's like following Poochie or Louie, or just kind of all over the place. And then I caught myself, and I'm like, wait a minute, I need to stop talking and just go up there, grab his lead and put him in place. Like, that's what I need to do. So it's being in the house. You have to be super aware of what you're saying to your dog too. And I'm trying to catch myself not talking to them as much and letting them blow me off. And then working on, maybe reinforcing with the lead if they're not really listening, or trying to find a place board and putting it nearby that they can reinforce that place work too.
It's not even not talking. It's making sure that when you say something, if this is the level that you're at in recall with your dog, you already have the leash in your hand, or you're close to your dog and the leash is kind of near you so you can pick it up if they don't listen. So making sure that before you say it, being intentional about going, okay, I'm not going to say this until I am, 5 seconds away from enforcing this, but I'm not going to call my dog halfway across a football field. And with a dog I haven't practiced recall, I'm going to go up and get them. It's something that it looks different for every dog in the situation that you're in, but a step-by-step, which I think that Jillian already sort of said it for how she does with puppies, is for a brand new dog practicing recall, long lead, ideally, or a 6 foot. I mean, you can do it 2 feet away.
Not a retractable leash.
You can. There are some trainers that do it with retractable. I just think they're so clunky in my hand, and they hurt.
They can snap too.
Yeah, that's true for a larger breed dog for sure. So I will say, Kemper, come. At the same exact time that I am saying Kemper, come, I am pulling and creating pressure on that lead. Okay. So that pressure is staying on until my dog makes the decision to turn towards me. That can look like eye contact. That can even look like turning away from the other thing. So the pressure is off the second that he makes the decision to start coming back. Sometimes when that dog makes that decision to come back, I will throw in some sort of like, yes, good boy, and give like that verbal affection, verbal motivation to finish coming back to me. But that happens when they agree to come back, not when they are all the way back to me. Okay. The other thing about the way that we teach recall that is a little bit different, and the only reason I know that is because every single time I tell a client this, they go, oh, our recall is not come back to me and then leave whenever you want again. It's come back to me and then stay with me until I release you again. So it's not, there's a finished part of this. It's not just come near me and then zoom past me. It's stay by my side or move with me, or like you're connected to me until I invite you to disconnect again. That's a key part of recall that I feel like a lot of people miss.
When do you take off the leash and then say, let me practice off leash? Like at what point do you say, I feel confident that I can do that?
I for sure would be using the leash for a good amount of time and practicing bettering your relationship before you ever take that next step. But I might kind of experiment with it in maybe I would do drop leash first. See if I can recall them with a dropped long line. And then if I need it, I can always go and pick up the leash. And then once I'm really, really good with that, then that's maybe where you can start experimenting with taking off the leash. A lot of people also like to use e-collars as kind of like a backup to your leash. I've heard it called like the invisible leash before.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell clients that you take that leash off when you haven't had to touch the leash in a long time, like a month, you know, but the second that you go and you take that leash off and you're like, well, I did have to pick it up yesterday because he was blowing me off, you know, then you're setting yourself up for a situation where your dog is going to blow you off. So you make sure that your recall is reliable. And I wouldn't even drop the leash until I no longer have to create pressure to get my dog to come back. So your first step is, do I have to create pressure to get my dog to come back to me when I call them? If I no longer have to do that reliably, then let me try dropping the leash, right? And this might look different in every situation. You might have a dog who will come back to you indoors, but outside they're not going to, and you have to create pressure. So you might be able to drop your leash indoors, or you might be able to take your leash off indoors and call your dog, but outdoors you're still creating pressure with that leash. So step one is, do I need to create pressure on the leash to get my dog to come back in this environment? Okay. When I no longer have to do that, I can go to drop lead. Step two is, when was the last time do I no longer have to pick this leash up to get them to come back to me in this environment reliably? And then step three is taking the leash off. But I'm a huge fan of e-collars when it comes to off-leash life, because that is my off-leash leash. That's my only way of communicating with my dog. You know, if they were to get in that situation, or if I'm not in their sight with them, or if they can't hear me or something like that, that's like my safety to go to.
Jill, do you ever introduce e-collar to puppies as they're beginning to learn recall? Like, do you layer that on top, or at what point would you start layering e-collar on top of the lead?
I never start with e-collar. I always start with on leash. For the owner and for the dog, I want to make sure that the owner has an understanding of pressure and release, and they're not kind of just skipping to the next step.
Yeah.
And then same for the dog, because if your dog isn't understanding the basic pressure and release, then it's going to be hard for you to layer an e-collar onto that. That's going to be a lot of different things that they're trying to take in at one time. So I mean, once they get a really good understanding with the leash, and it's been a few months, they're working on their rules and boundaries and structure at home with their owner, then that's when I would introduce an e-collar.
I would say 6 or 7 months is going to be my like youngest that I would introduce an e-collar. But she's exactly right. Why add on an e-collar if your dog doesn't understand even physical leash pressure? Because then you are putting them in a situation where you're going to have to go higher up on that e-collar than you would have to if you had taught the foundation of pressure and release. On top of going back to originally what we talked about, have you earned it? have you created this expectation that your dog should come back to you because it feels good? Is that what your relationship looks like? Or are you just looking to add the e-collar on because you want to either suppress, or are you adding food in because you want to either just motivate your dog to come back to you for a reason besides your relationship?
Yeah.
And that's not fair.
Right. And when people come to me and the first thing they say is, I want to work on e-collar, when they haven't learned any other thing from us, I don't really love that, because I'm like, you're probably trying to take kind of the easy way out here, and use that as more of like a, if you don't come back to me, I'm going to use the e-collar on you, or it's those same people that say you can show your e-collar to your dog and they run away.
Yes. Yes.
So
that's exactly it.
that.
Yeah, I always start with the leash.
I heard that so many times as when I talk to different people and we talk about the e-collar, and they're like, oh, my friend's been using it on her dog, and every time she sees it, she behaves so well. And I'm like,
I don't even have to press the button.
Yeah. And I hate that, because when we first, like, the way you guys teach e-collar makes so much sense. And you always say, put it up to your skin, feel it. Like, this is the level your dog's on, and you cannot feel the amount that they're on. Like, all of our dogs, they're super strong dogs.
Bubbles works on a 1 out of 100, and he is the most powerful of your dogs.
Most powerful dog. And the 1 out of 100, you cannot feel that stem. Like, you can't feel that e-collar at all. And that's the whole point of e-collar that you guys have taught, is build a relationship with your dog, teach them leash pressure first, what that pressure means to them in terms of communication. Then add on the e-collar on top of that once you feel good about that leash pressure, and teach them that you put the leash pressure, then you do the e-collar, then you teach them, this is what I want from you.
Yeah.
And most of the time, because they already know the leash pressure, they're in such low levels that the e-collar is just a regular collar for them. Doesn't mean it's going to hurt. Doesn't mean, it's just another way to communicate with them in a longer distance if you need to.
I think a way that I would kind of overall explain it is, I want my dog not to come back to me because of some sort of consequence, whether that consequence is a good consequence or a bad consequence. I don't want that dog coming back to me because I have food, or because I am super exciting, or because I am going to light them up on an e-collar if they don't. I want my dog coming back to me because of me, because I have created that expectation, and because it feels good to come back to me because our relationship, and that's just the expectation there. The e-collar does come into play not as a consequence, but as information of what it is that I'm asking in that moment. Because at the end of the day, it is still a different language that you're asking them. You are still saying English words to your dog and then asking them to come back to you. So that e-collar, leash pressure, all of that isn't a consequence of, if you don't come back, this is going to happen. This is what I mean by saying bubbles come, or whatever it is. It's not punishment, it's information.
So I have some questions that some of our listeners dropped on our question box on social media. So I'm just going to go through some of these, because we covered some of the first ones already, which was, what are the first steps toward working through the life off leash? We just kind of covered that through e-collar training. And the other one is, what are 3 solid indicators or milestones in training that you and your dog are ready for off leash? So we kind of touched that, but if you were to put it in 3 different bullet points.
Jillian, do you want to know who asked this question? Nick's mom. That's like one of Jill's favorite. She's known since he was a little baby puppy. He's a little German Shepherd, and she's awesome. She's awesome with Nick. So, and I love that question. It's a great question.
Yeah, 3 milestones, like 3 things that we need to check before we get to off leash.
I would say good on leash first. Right. That would be my one.
Yeah.
So loose lead in every environment. I can think of more if you make me, unless you want to take one. I don't want to take over.
I think as long as your dog understands rules and boundaries in your house, like if you set the boundary with them that they can't be up on the furniture, and you ask if they do jump up on the furniture and you ask them to get off, they get off right away. So like, they're listening to things that you're saying in the house.
Yeah,
that's a good indicator.
I think the last thing and it would just be a safety thing. So it's 3 indicators that your dog is ready for off leash life. Is that what okay?
Yeah, 3. So if we were to put it on 3 little check.
So good on leash,
yeah,
rules and boundaries, and respecting rules and boundaries in the house. And then I would make sure that in those situations that your dog, and we already sort of said this, but your dog would come back to you on leash first, right? So kind of put them, if you're going to bring your dog to on a hike and you give them a 15-foot or a 30-foot line, 30 foot's way too much for me, but and you call them, make sure they're coming back to you every single time without leash pressure. And unless you can go through a hike and you really don't have to pick that leash up ever, then don't take the leash off at all. It's just keep that leash, that you keep working on the level that you're at.
Right.
Do you always use the same word when you do recall? Like, do you do leash pressure, same come, or their name, or here, or is like, do you have to use the same word every time? Does that matter at all? Like, should you be really like specific about that?
I don't want people getting hung up on that. I guess that's not the first thing that I think of when I think of recall.
As long as you're consistent.
Yeah, I think, and sometimes I'll say Kemp come, or sometimes I'll say Kemp, or sometimes I'll go Bricky or whatever, right? So, but it's the intention that matters. And that's where it goes back to the relationship, that they're not just coming back to me because I've trained them to have this response to a certain sound that they hear. Yeah. I've trained them to keep me relevant, that I am going to give direction.
And this recall plays into everything else that's going on in your relationship. It's not just outside when you have the lead on, when you're saying these words and expecting them to come back to you. It's what are you doing in the house? What are the boundaries you're setting? How are you following through with that? And you have to be so aware when you are near your dog and you're trying to teach them new things, because now that I'm with Dennis in the house and he's healing from surgery, I have to be super aware. Like, he's noticing Poochie and Louie. They are not the best example. And I see his little eyes just like, okay, I can go on the couch because they can go on the couch, because our little ones are, they're wild, you guys. Like, that does not set a good example on me.
Every episode we talk about.
We do. Yeah. If you've been listening, my struggle with my little ones. We all have it. We all have struggles. So Dennis keeps seeing them, and today I turned my back and Dennis jumped on the couch and like, all right, this is where I'm gonna be. I'm like, oh, you know what? Because in my head, I'm like, why do you think that's okay? I've never invited you on the couch. You have a bed right here. You're on the lead. Like, I let his lead loose a little bit, and he just made that decision to go right on the couch. So then I turn and I see Louie and Poochie on the couch going on and off, bouncing off the couch, looking at the window, going crazy. And I'm like, you know what? That's what it is. So with Dennis, I have to be super, super aware. Like, today I was trying to eat breakfast and I had his place board right there, putting him on place, and then he would get up and come out, and I would get up, put him on place, and get up. And then I kept doing that the whole time. I would take a bite, get up, take a bite, get up. Or, and then eventually I tethered him to the door, but he would just be standing looking at me, and I would have to get up and use body pressure. So it's just like, you have to put that work in if you want to get to that point. Is it hard? Yes. Are you going to wish you could just sit there and eat your breakfast?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. But, and I think with recall, though, the risk there is a safety thing, so putting the work in is important in every aspect. But if your end goal is to get your dog to be off leash with you, moving, like, at a park in a public setting, you have to work at it. You can't just go off of, and I hear this a lot. Tell me if you hear this. Mm-hmm. Well, the gate was open one time and they came back. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean your dog has a good recall command. Right. That just means you got lucky. Right. Just because it happened once does not mean that the dog is trained to do that now. Yeah. But it's a safety issue. So you have to put even that much more work into it, because it's not only a safety issue for your dog, but it can be a safety issue for the world around them. If they run out in the middle of the road and somebody swerves, you could be potentially hurting other humans without a good recall command. Now, if you are going to take your dog on a hike, absolutely recommend an e-collar, recommend training correctly with an e-collar, not using it as a punishment, but as information. But I also recommend microchipping your pets. I recommend doing a FI collar, like or a tracking collar, something to where if they go missing, you know where they are. I know air tags are big, but air tags, you can't see if your dog is, if you're hiking in a remote area, you won't be able to see that because there's no Wi-Fi around there.
Yeah.
So FI collars are my favorite, but microchip your pets because that's the one thing that the shelter is going to check.
The FI collars, we actually have that on all of our dogs, and it's a cool type of tracking device that goes on. It's right on the collar. You can't take it off, and it's very flush to their skin, so it's not like sticking out. And you get the app. You're able to, they have a plan, which is really cool. You don't have to get the plan, but if you do, it gives you more information.
And it's affordable. The plan is super affordable. You can like choose how often or how much you want to pay monthly, which was awesome.
Yeah. And I really like the fact that it has, you have the ability to see like how many steps your dog takes every day. You can see how their sleep patterns are, if they woke up, if they have been sleeping.
Do you want to know my favorite part? And Sarah and Easton are going to make fun of me for this. My favorite part is the ranking.
Of course it was. Millie's like on the FI app, like, Kemper is number 50. We got to get them up. We got to get them up.
Actually, he's number, I think, he's in the 11th percentile of all FI dogs, guys. So no, but another cool aspect is that it's kind of like a social media type thing for dogs. So I can follow other dogs. And when I first got it, I only got it like a month ago. When I first got it, I was looking through, cause I guess it syncs with your contacts. And I was like, oh my God, wait, that's, I know Loki, I know Woodford, I know all these dogs. And so I would follow them. And then in my mind, and none of these people know this, but I'm having secret competitions with Kemper's ranking and their dog's ranking, because you can see their dog's ranking. So if you're hearing this, please follow Kemper on FI and please keep track of his ranking.
The FI collar really is, it's cool too, because you can flash a light if you are at night and it flashes a light off your collar. But I do like it because the air tags, we've tried the air tags and we have multiple dogs, and Cinnamon, of course, if you know Cinnamon, you know Cinnamon. The first thing she did when we put the little tags, like hangers on their collar, is she ripped it off. Yeah. So
it's just a good thing to have. If you're planning on doing off leash, it's a good thing to have on them.
Tracking,
even you hear horror stories about people dropping their dogs off at the vet and then they take them out for a potty break and then the dog gets scared and goes missing. It's just the microchip is super helpful, but that's not going to help you find your dog. That's going to, help somebody else know that dog belongs to you, but that doesn't mean you're getting your dog back. So I think if you're going to do off leash, do some sort of tracking collar, absolutely microchip, and then make sure you have practiced this for a very, very, very long period of time in that environment that you are taking off the leash. So don't say, okay, well, my dog is off leash trained when it comes to being at this park, but now I'm going to go to a busier park or a different park with new smells. And assume that it's going to be the same there.
And if your dog is really, really good off leash at your typical park that you've been going to, and then you try a new park, try taking them on leash a couple times before you ever drop their leash. So get that practice in first.
That's what one of the questions was here too, is, so this one is kind of, I don't know, I have to read it right, but what do you think about open off leash dog parks? Are they better than regular dog parks, or are they just a bad idea in your opinion? We did talk about dog parks in a previous episode, only dog parks, why they're, the good and the bad. But in this question, I guess they're asking
about because there are dog parks in some states that Georgia has leash laws. I don't know if that is something that I assume most states have it, but I do know that there are some parks that do not have any fencing and it's just off leash dog parks. Okay. So when it comes to socialization, I think that that's better because then dogs can create space and distance to deal with conflict. But if your dog does not have recall, then you're up the creek without a paddle. Like, you can't get your dog out of a situation, even if it's not something that your dog is instigating, even if it's not something that is your dog's quote unquote fault. If you notice another dog getting tense around them, you want to be able to say, come back to me to get them out of that situation.
Yeah, no matter how much space they have, like if it's an open, bigger dog park and your dog could be, good at recall, somewhat good, or you feel like they are, but they'll still, like we were just talking about this, about our dogs. We have a big yard, having both of our dogs loose. At first we're like, well, they're going to have that space, maybe they're not going to be so focused on each other, but when there's a trigger, they're going to redirect to each other or whichever dog is close by. So having that, I think even if you do have a good recall, if your dog gets into that intense moment and you can't see it right there, how are you going to even catch that?
I think when it comes to like open and off leash dog parks, I think it is more like natural socialization for dogs, but then so that's good, right? But then we have to remember that natural socialization for dogs and natural communication for dogs also involves biting. It involves growling. It involves that is how they communicate. So if we are going to change what our expectations are of a dog's ability to deal with conflict, then we have to be there to help them deal with that conflict. And in a dog park setting or in a lot of different settings, recall is your way to get them out of that conflict if you don't want that to turn into a fight.
With recall too, a lot of times people are really just thinking, now I'm at a dog park. It's better for me to just let them off leash. It's, dog parks, I feel like we all fall into it. Like as dog owners, like you want your dog to live their best life. You feel like you have good recall, and then you really don't unless you check the boxes that we just, talked about, like really being good at it. And you feel like your dog listens to you in some cases, and then you fall into, that idea of let him off leash. It's going to be better for him, but you really haven't checked those boxes. Like you really haven't.
Yeah, it could be different for every, I cannot call Kemper off of a squirrel. If I'm working on a off leash hike with Kemper, he doesn't get, I don't take the leash off. It's drop lead because of his nose, his prey drive, the hound part. I can call Kemper off of playing with another dog mid play. But that's because since he was 10 weeks old, he has been around other dogs, and we have practiced recall off of dogs, off of, excitement involving dogs almost every day of his life. But with squirrels, I'm not Snow White, so I'm not able to just get squirrels to be around me all the time. They're kind of unexpected. It's not a controlled situation, but I mean, it can be different. Most people can't call their dog off of another dog mid-play. Most people can probably keep their dog off leash with them on a hike a little bit better, but I spend more time exercising my dog in a pack of dogs than I do in the woods. But that's not true for everybody.
Yeah, you really have to know your dog and know their triggers. Like all of our dogs have different triggers. Max is definitely his Kong, his ball. He's obsessed with that.
Yeah, recall off of that would be a great exercise for Max.
Oh, I don't know. That's going to be a long way.
I think that wouldn't be the first exercise, but that would be a great.
No, that's going to be an awesome thing to do. Because what's funny? Today I had a dream about Max and the Kong ball, and the ball fell in the ocean. The ball fell in the ocean, and then Max went to get the ball, and he dove deep in the ocean, and a shark bit him. So maybe that was that's really. I really dreamed that today that we're recording
that
this
we
episode.
have about our dogs. The dream, it's insane.
I think that's me being told work on recall off the Kong ball before you go near the ocean.
Going to attack your dog.
Oh my God. I woke up whoa, I went to Max and I'm like, oh, Max, I love you so much.
I used to have dreams that when Kemper was a baby, he's always been very scared of machinery. I used to have dreams that, and it was reoccurring, that people would come to me and say, okay, we're here to pick Kemper up for war. You've been training him to be a war dog, right? A bomb sniffing dog, right? And I'm like, oh my God, no, I haven't been. We got to take him anyway. I'm sorry. You should have been training him around more machinery. He's going to die.
Oh,
yeah, it's crazy how they kind of infiltrate our dreams. But yeah, I think recall for Max is important. And if you don't do it, watch out because sharks are coming.
Well, I feel like we covered a lot in this episode in terms of recall. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about kids and dogs.
And it's not going to be I'm really excited about this topic. Never mind, guys. Just listen to the next episode in 2 weeks from when you hear this.
Yes. And we also love receiving your questions and your feedback. So if you guys want to email us at info@thinklikeadog.com, we really appreciate it. Do you guys want to add anything else to the episode?
No.
All right. And if you enjoy our podcast, we would also love to receive your review. That means a lot to us and it helps us keep going. It helps the ranking of the podcast as well. So please take some time to do that. And don't forget,
practice makes progress.
All right. Until next time.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Think Like a Dog Podcast and follow at Mirror Image Canine for training tips. If you have any questions, please reach out to us via email at info@thinklikeadogpodcast.com.